Introducing Instagram Teen Accounts, a new way to keep your teen safer as they grow, like making sure they always have their seatbelt on.
All right, buckle up. Good job.
New Instagram Teen Accounts, automatic protections for who can contact your teen and the content they can see.
Hey, warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. He did a nice in-depth look at the Atlantic 10 over at Bustin' Brackets a few days ago, so we're going to be looking at that landscape. Couple of that, we're going to be taking a look at the blue blood ads for North Carolina and Kansas over the last week or so, with Tyzhaun Claude heading on over to North Carolina, David Coit heading on over to Kansas, what that means in terms of what we can expect out of them moving forward, the fact that these two teams have a few more options entering into the season as well, so gonna have some fun there. And here in segment number 1, we're gonna recap what we've seen in terms of news and notes in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Not necessarily a ton, but we did see a gentleman from Israel decide to join Utah, which don't find that very often, so we'll have some fun there. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, and we beggeth you, we pleadeth you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions, and you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is by Twitter/X timeline at June_41. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and please do send those in just because we are low on college basketball player movement over these next few months, as pretty much a lot of these rosters are set, but you're seeing a little bit happening in terms of some of these ancillary moves. Like we did see it with Utah on Tuesday. Joel Karam, he comes over from the country of Israel, 6'10", guy that's able to shoot it from 3. He was playing for, hopefully I say this correctly, Apol Tel Aviv, and he was averaging 13.5 points, 12 boards, 3.5 blocks, shot about 43% from three-point range. He was a part of the Israeli under-18 All-Star team as well. He's going to be heading on over to Utah, and Utah has quite a bit of versatility. They've got Mongolian Mike, who's going to be coming in, and the more they look at this team, the more they like it. Ezra Uzar was a relatively solid player when he was over at East Carolina this past year, where he was averaging about 11.5 points per contest. He's capable of giving some double-doubles. They do, I believe, have Caleb Lohner, but I think that he's going to be playing on the football side of things. But you do take a look at this bunch, and they've got a lot of guys that are going to be willing to play positionless basketball. You're probably going to need Mongolian Mike to be playing the point a lot, just looking at the overall landscape of the roster. I am wondering where that guard play is going to be coming from, but they do have quite a few guys that are able to do a nice job of just being able to space out the floor. They've got a lot of guys that are going to be really tough individual matchups, so that I think is going to be intriguing moving forward. And that was really the lone piece of player news that we did see on Tuesday, but we are starting to see a little bit more coming out in terms of some of these guys that they may or may not be dealing with injuries. I know that John Rossing is one of the best follows in terms of taking a look at these guys that are perhaps just dealing with a few things. Maybe they're not taking part in terms of the team's foreign trip, like we were seeing that with Northwestern. Ty Berry, Matthew Nicholson, and Brooks Barnheiser are not playing on the foreign tour due to precautionary reasons for our good friend and Mr. John Rossing, so he's been able to do a nice job being able to keep things on the up and up there, but we are right now still awaiting what could be a little bit more in terms of college basketball movement and in terms of like the injuries that are really going to be costly for the upcoming season. Other than Elmarco Jackson for Kansas, we haven't seen a ton of that as of right now, and that should be coming in the next few weeks and as things are going along in terms of these summer workouts and summer drills. So I'm going to very much be keeping you guys up to date there, and that's a big reason why you're hearing more and more conference previews on the podcast, because the college basketball news cycle, it is getting a little bit more dry, but we did see Kansas and North Carolina pick up a pair of guys over the last 2 weeks, and certainly the Atlantic 10 landscape is going to be fun, and we're going to be chatting about that and so much more with Tristan Freeman of Bustin' Brackets on the flip side here on Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it's always great to be joined by this man, it's Tristan Freeman. He does such an excellent job over at Bustin' Brackets and his fan-sided college basketball coverage. I know that he is hard at work getting set for the upcoming season. Has been joining me quite a bit throughout the summertime as he's doing a great job putting out so many different lists, everything from impact freshmen to impact transfers. List goes on and on. He's looking at every nook and cranny to be able to get you set for the upcoming college basketball season. He's out there in the great state of Pennsylvania, and you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at HoopsNut351 altogether. And Tristan, it is always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Certainly, I know that you've been taking a look at everything from the ACC to the Rising League to the Atlantic 10, everything out there in the great state of Pennsylvania in terms of those teams, more specifically the Pittsburgh area. But first things first, let's take a look at a move that did happen in the ACC about a week or so ago. And I think it's went a little bit under the radar, and I think that it'll be a move that is worth noting with Tyzhaun Claude heading on over to North Carolina. Want to get your thoughts on it because with Armando Bacot out for North Carolina, I felt like they maybe had a little bit of a lack of depth down low, and to say Tyzhaun Claude is going to be some sort of a double-double machine for North Carolina would be very much overstating it, but I like the move for North Carolina. I do think that it fortifies their front court for the upcoming season.
Yeah, like you say, he originally came over from Western Carolina where he had a big year, goes to Georgia Tech, and for all intents and purposes, he was fine for what he was a role player, averaged around 17 minutes a game off the bench, 5 points, 5 rebounds, perfectly fine body in the ACC. Now, is he going to change the world, anything for North Carolina? No, but as we've seen, especially in the NIL era, bigger programs can just throw out, a certain amount of money so that they can have guaranteed depth. I think coaches are always going to be afraid that an injury or two leaves them depleted at a position, and if nothing else, UNC now knows they can have a guy I can give him 15 minutes per game off the bench in front of a Van Allen Lubin and Jalen Washington. But I am curious what this means and how they feel about, guys like Washington and Dayton High and James Brown, the incoming freshman. I mean, they might not be as certain about those guys that they can be focal pieces up front. And as you say, replacing Armando Bacot, who was guaranteed production of 15 and 12, maybe they feel like it's truly going to be a collective effort. And if that's the case, then, it's really going to come down to how well the backcourt does with Cato and the return ACC Player of the Year. If they're not stars once again, then UNC could take a little bit of a dip compared to last season.
Yep, absolutely. And we've seen with quite a few of these teams, sometimes depth, it is a little bit lacking with them. And for North Carolina as well, they have been a team that under Hubert Davis, sometimes the depth has been a little bit less than I'd like to see it. So I did feel like that was a good move for them. And then another team that last season was lacking quite a bit of depth as well was Kansas. And I feel like they've learned from their mistakes of last season as well as they made another nice pickup in David Coit, much like we were talking about with North Carolina. This is not one of these moves that will take Kansas from jumping like 10 spots or anything like that in your projector or finish. And yeah, Kansas outside the top 10. I'm wondering what you're looking at to start with, but certainly for Kansas, just having that added depth, knowing that they've got a little bit of shooting off the bench if they need it. I think that that's just very good for them. And much like we were talking about with North Carolina, maybe it's not that piece that'll push them to a national title or anything like that, but if they get into a little bit of a sticky spot, they have a little bit more assurance coming off the bench.
Yeah, and Kansas was a really good example of what happens when you have limited depth because the injury to Kevin McCullough pretty much doomed them in the postseason. So this time around, they got guards for days. You add Coit, who was a 20-point-per-game scorer, Rylan Griffin, who was outstanding. Kansas is definitely a team with no depth issues at all, but now you're going to have to ask, how is it ultimately going to work out? Will these guys be willing to take lesser minutes? They're going to have to. If not, that's going to be a problem that they're going to have to consider because chemistry is something that remains to be seen. But I am going to be interested to see how the minutes are going to work out for all these teams to have this incredible amount of depth.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that it's going to be fun to take a look at them for the upcoming season. As joining me on the show, we do have Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. And he's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Tristan, you're always doing a great job looking at these power conferences, certainly looking at the ACC, but I know that over the last week or so, you also took a look at the Atlantic 10, another conference where we have seen quite a few good moves in the transfer portal. Like, it's not every day that you see some of these guys in the top 100, like a Zedke, decide that he's going to be going down a level. We're going to be seeing Posh Alexander in the Atlantic 10, which adds just massive for the entirety of the conference in general, and just how do you view an A10 that has really been having a tough time getting at-large bids into the NCAA tournament, but it feels like year in and year out, you've got a lot of like top 50, top 60 type teams.
This is something I've also covered for Field 68, that the A10's in the sweet spot where they may not get, top 100 guys to come out of high school, and they won't get the elite transfers, but they can still get really good guys. And more importantly, they can still keep their top guys from transferring out for the most part. A lot of these teams were able to keep some stars with eligibility, and that's ultimately going to be important. And Dayton, coming off the NCAA tournament, getting 2 proven power conference starters is big for them. We'll see if Zach Key can be a 15-8 guy as he was previously for Ohio State, and whether Josh Alexander fits within the system. But there's definitely a lot of like what Dayton did and what other teams did, such as Duquesne and VCU and St. Joe's, most importantly, was able to keep their star players. So I think all in all, it was a solid offseason for the A10. I'm definitely going to be interested to see how many top 100 teams they have, and like you said, how many of them can be in the at-large conversation.
Yeah, but absolutely. And when it comes to VCU as well, I think that they're such a fascinating team because they didn't bring in a ton via the transfer portal, but I do like the fact that they brought in Philip Russell, a nice top flight scorer, a few seasons ago when Southeast Missouri State was able to go to the NCAA tournament. Couple that with last year over at UT Arlington, you could tell the difference that he was able to make when he was out there on the court versus off the court. And for VCU, what happened with Max Scholgo this offseason was certainly up and down to say the least, but the fact that they were able to retain him after it looked like he was going to go to Villanova, I feel like might have been the biggest move in the entirety of the offseason for VCU, just knowing that he knows the Ryan Odom system and has been with them since the Utah State days.
Yeah, look, there are things behind the scenes that not everyone's going to know, and who knows whether many rumors work well or not, but academics plays a lot of factors, and a lot of players either transferring out or wherever they end up or is they will end up. I mean, Michigan publicly is the best case of that. So for players who feel like they wanted to go somewhere else, you always have to make sure academically you're updated and everything. Otherwise, you might not be able to get admitted, but that ultimately can work out for other teams because all schools have different academic standards. Ultimately, for VCU, you get back some key guys. You return all of your top guards outside of Sean Barstow, and then you add a former 6th man of the year from the WAC and Philip Russell, who's a capable scorer in his own right. Outside of probably getting a post player inside, it was a pretty good offseason for VCU. And what could be a legit logjam at the top, there could be a whole bunch of teams that could make a case that they could be the team to beat next season.
Yep, and certainly bringing in Jack Clark for them as well, which it feels like he's on school number 27 at this point. That is going to be interesting to say the least, as we do have one of our good friends, Tristan Freeman, of Busted Brackets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And just when you take a look at the Atlantic 10, as I know that there's a few straw polls out there, I know that you've joined a few Atlantic 10 podcasts, and there are quite a few people that love this conference. They do an amazing job of being able to cover it. But do you personally feel like there's a team or two in the conference that you're right now feeling a little bit more bullish / bearish on than the consensus?
There seems to have been a consensus view of tiers in the league with the top. I think the middle, a lot of people have Duquesne and George Mason right in the middle of teams that could be sleeper contenders. And I'm biased with Duquesne because I covered him locally. So I'll look at George Mason, and they bring back Darius Maddox, who's a 14-point per game scorer. That's huge. But then they added KD Johnson, who is a guy who I think has plenty of, it was hard to say potential because he's a 5th-year senior, but he's a proven guy at the SEC level at Auburn. And I think he's someone that can come in and be an offensive upgrade over Abraka Koji. They bring back Jalen Haynes, who averaged 12 points a game in the year prior, but sat out last year. He's eligible to go. And then you also have Zach Anderson and Giovanni Edgemeria, who's a capable scorer as well. So I think in terms of the depth that George Mason has is probably even greater than what they had last year. And again, if Johnson can have a big year at running the offense paired with Maddox, then they could make a sneaky case for a top 5 caliber roster in the league.
Yep, absolutely. And I do want to get your thoughts on this team as well, because I feel like you might be sort of thinking what I am in the Atlantic 10. feels like we're seeing a few more up-tempo teams with George Washington really cranking up their tempo ever since Frank Martin has got there. UMass has been playing a little bit faster. St. Joe's has as well. But it feels like St. Bonaventure, as teams are getting a little bit more and more up-tempo, feels like they're really getting back to their roots. It's a bit of a new-look team from what we saw last season, as St. Bonaventure does lose a lot of their top guys from a season ago, but they bring in Melvin Council, top guy from Wagner, who was able to make the NCAA tournament last season. Chance Moore, 6'6", do-it-all sort of player who was over at Missouri State, a team that was playing quite a bit of defense over the last few seasons. And I take a look at the St. Bonaventure team, and I don't necessarily see a lot of sizzle. I don't see that one guy that's necessarily going to be running the show and giving out 5+ assists per game. But what I do see is a rock-solid team that I feel like might be the best defensive team in this conference.
It's certainly possible. They took a lot of chances. They added several JUCO transfer guys and a few players who didn't get a ton of minutes or playing time at the previous stop. The only proven guys that they added was, like you said, Chance Moore, who came over from Missouri State, who was a former top 100 prospect, Melvin Council, who was fairly good last year at his previous stop, but will he be able to make the transition to the A10 level as a lead guard? Because if not, then it's going to be a struggle. I mean, he was good at Wagner, but going from the NEC to the A10, that's a big leap. And Noel Brown's the top returning player for them. He definitely had his moments in the front court for them, but can he be a lead guy without Chad Vennon? That's a major question. I think they're a team that could make a move up, but they also could very well be in the bottom tier because there's just so many question marks.
Yep, there are a lot of question marks, and when it comes to this program, I think a lot of people are banking on them not necessarily being that number one team, but a team that we have not really talked about in terms of the Atlantic 10, and a team that is certainly going to have a lot of sizzle around them is St. Louis. Josh Schertz takes over after he did such a great job of it at Indiana State. Isaiah Swope, Robbie Avila is coming with them. But I think what else is really big is that he retained Larry Hughes II, which makes me feel old that we've got a Larry Hughes II currently playing college basketball. Also Gibson Jimerson, who feels like he's in his 17th year of college basketball as well. But what are you expecting from a St. Louis bunch that obviously is going to be in a lot of transition? We saw last year the St. Louis bunch, they played fast, but they really didn't play any defense. And there are a few returners from a season ago, but I really like the fact that Josh Schertz brought with him Avila and Swope, who I think are going to be able to help him instill his style of play.
Yeah, and look, those are two guys that could easily follow the Texas transfers, and the one guy who went to Xavier, they all could have went power conference. Robbie Avila is going to be one of the top returning players in the country and probably the preseason favorite to win A10 Player of the Year now that Deron Holmes and Jordan King are gone. So just having him and Swope to run the offense is great. And then what better way for a high-octane offense that can pass with Avila than better than having one of the top sharpshooters in the country back in Gibson Jimerson. So they're clearly going to be able to score. My question is going to be, can they defend? Because I think, as Lloyd Chicago showed when they first entered the league, there's better stout defenses in the A10 compared to the NBC. There could be some adjustments for them. So while I do think that there's plenty to like about St. Louis, I wouldn't automatically assume that they're going to be able to be the team to beat in the league. I think they're going to have their own growing pains.
Yep, I do think that there are going to be some growing pains, but when you're able to have two guys like Swope and Avila that know the Josh Schertz system, a guy in Gibson Jimerson who's put up big numbers in the conference, that's a great place to start. And always a great place to be is with you on this podcast, my friend Tristan. You're doing such a great job. Take a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. You're hard at work taking a look at the offseason moves that we've seen and how those are going to translate to the regular season. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at HoopsNut351 on Twitter. You also follow at Bustin' Brackets, and we're officially in preseason mode. So everything we're doing, we'll be looking at who the teams to beat in not only the A10, but in all the country.
Absolutely. Tristan, doing such an amazing job taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, one such great insight. So big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNN_D1. Keep in mind, LRCM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And with player movement very much being at a premium right now and things being much more set for the upcoming college basketball season in terms of rosters, please do send in these Twitter/X questions so that way I know what you want me to be talking about and highlighting on this podcast. And you're going to be getting more and more conference previews as the offseason goes along as well. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and offseason. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.